Hello, welcome to this latest edition of the Go Crisis podcast, where we delve into the many challenges that come for any company, for any public authority, when faced with a major incident, possibly a catastrophic one, which is going to turn a lot of people's world upside down. As ever, I'm joined by the boss, CEO of Go Crisis, Elmarie Marais. Elmarie, good to see you again.
Hi, David. Nice to see you as always. Yes, so today I've invited Harry Conibear-Griffiths to come and join us and talk to us. Harry is the Senior Manager for Business Resilience at Virgin Atlantic and is also a fellow board member alongside with me at the UK Aviation Emergency Planning Group. But Harry has started in this industry as a fresh-faced individual and has worked himself up to quite an impressive role. And I wanted to learn from him and let him share how he became the senior manager at Virgin for this very, very important role. And I hope we will learn from him today. And with us today, we've got a colleague and a very good friend, Harry Conibear-Griffiths. Harry, I've known you for many, many years. Our careers have been parallel, as it always is in this industry. It's a very small industry. And I've known of you and about you and have worked with you for a while. But I want you to introduce yourself and tell us what you do, and then we'll get into the conversation about what that looks like for you day to day.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I'm Harry Conibear-Griffiths. I am the Senior Manager of Business Resilience at Virgin Atlantic, and I'm responsible for business continuity, crisis management, and emergency response across the airline and also Virgin Atlantic Holidays.
Thanks. Now, Harry, what I want out of today is I always find myself around barbecues where people go, how did you get into emergency management or crisis management? And the answer for me is no, I never wanted to be that as a child when I grew up. But there's this incredible, fascinating world in our careers that people don't really know about. And I wanted even those who are entering this career to sort of get a bit of a glimpse on what that looks like. So firstly, how did you decide to become a crisis manager?
Yeah, so in in a very roundabout way, I think actually. So I think back when I was at school, I did a lot with cadets, and we had a really good um, uh, cadet leader, and he made us all do a BTEC in public services. And I was going into my A levels, and I was doing drama, and I could perform
I can see that.
like all good crisis managers can. Um, but the exam is really hard, and I wasn't going to get the grades to go to university. So I did the next level up of the BTEC, and that had a module in it. It was a BTEC in public services, and it had a module in it about how the emergency services respond to major incidents in the UK. And that fascinated me. Was always interested in, the news and big disasters and disaster films and those. So that module really struck a chord. And then I was like, right, this is what I want to do in my career. This is what's next for me. Um, there were only two university courses at the time that did disaster management. There was at the time there was Kingston, which did environmental hazards and disaster management, which was very much natural hazards, earthquakes, tsunamis, and looking at it mainly from a geology perspective. And there was Coventry University that had quite an established course, and that was disaster management and emergency planning. And that's what I went to do. Now, on that course, there was buckets of students. There was people who were going to go down the NGO route and work for charities and go out to disaster-stricken zones and help to rebuild communities. There was those that were going to go into, I suppose, a public life of go and work in local and national governments or the emergency services or the military, which is in a roundabout way what I sort of did. And there was those that were going to go into the corporate world. I dabbled my toe in the military piece. I went and was part of the the University Officer Training Corps, and I went through that process, and I ended up sending an email to they're called the Joint Regional Liaison Officer, and that is essentially the military, they're a colonel rank, and it was the colonel in London who works alongside senior police and fire officers and government. What happens when the emergency services cannot respond? They draft in the military, but that requires logistics and coordination, and it's that individual who I went and worked alongside for about 6 months, whilst in between university stuff, and then I also before university, I took a gap year and I went and worked for another big response organization. And
I think that's when I got to know about you, because you started after I have left, and I knew about this new kid on the block with the big blue eyes. So that's when I started learning about you and your name.
So I joined them in my gap year, and then I went to university, and I was going back and forth throughout university and between doing stuff with the military, and then I joined them for 2 years as an account manager. I think I started on the Monday, and on the Tuesday, I think it was, the Germanwings plane crash happened. So I was straight in then and dealing with that. Although my day job was more around working with clients, making sure they've got the right services to suit their needs, looking at their consultancy work that they need to, and then going off and delivering that work as well, and then getting involved in the response as well. So it was a real mix. I was there for a couple of years, and then although a couple of years full time, but it felt like a long time because I was going back and forth every few months, really. And then I then went and joined Sky, initially as a crisis specialist, and I ended up leading that team, and I was the crisis lead there for about 6 years, and then I joined Virgin Atlantic, well, almost 3 years ago now.
Can I just ask, Harry, when in terms of Sky, were you there to help manage the process of any disaster hitting the company, or was it more about flying staff out to cover crisis and disaster? Because your whole timeline's really interesting, that whole educational route. Most of the people you seem to have worked with, that what you'd say were peers, were in it to then go and be part of the rescue. Whereas I'm wondering if with Sky, actually, you're there to be part of the prevention and then the cure when it hits the company.
Yeah, so to the latter, really. I was there building our crisis capability for Sky as a business. There were times where we did work really closely with Sky News, for example, those are the individuals that are going to go out to the front lines of war zones and hostile environments and cover the stories. And they can get into really some sticky spots, really, and so we did work closely with them to make sure there was the right plans in place on how would we get them out and what would we need to do. But the vast majority of the time it was looking at technology and cyber-based risks and data breach risks. And Sky is also a very, very large organization. There's 35,000 staff, all spread across Europe. And one of the big pieces of work that I looked at actually was, so from a crisis management process perspective, what if something happened in Germany or Italy? How would we manage that at a group level when we don't have crisis managers on the ground in Italy, and we're probably unlikely to send people there? So it's just a normal Sky office. So what would we do if there was a large fire, which there was in one of our offices in Italy? What would we do if there was flooding in Leeds? How do we build capability with the local teams that are there and put some sort of structure in place so there was a management team to step in and lead that team and then feed into the bigger crisis framework? So that's one of the pieces of work that I looked at. But yeah, the vast majority of the time it was technology and cyber-based risks. And yes, it's a broadcast and media company, and they do lots of other products now. But at the core of it, it's a technology business. What happens if a technology platform was unavailable, that's now affecting potentially hundreds of thousands, millions of customers. What are we doing as a business? And that's mainly where I focus my efforts. But yeah, there's lots of risks that are focused on that could potentially be a risk to any large organization. And so we covered the vast majority of those. Yeah.
And David, more to what I think you'd be interested to hear about is, so Harry and I started working really closely together while he was at Sky, and I'm sort of being careful with not breaching to any confidentiality, but we started working really actively when there was a journalist being sent into a conflict area, and how to make sure that they're looked after. And if something goes wrong, how do we get them out quickly? How do we support their families? And all of that. So that was really interesting. But outside of that, what was really fascinating to me is how the size of Sky and the amount of employees and operations they have, it was like Harry was really looking after the risk profile of a small city, really. And that involved, all of the above. And how do we continue our business? And how do we take care of our staff when something goes wrong, whatever that risk may be? But yes, so from a journalist perspective, I thought you'd be interested in hearing that.
Yeah, very much so. I tell you what I'm also interested about, Harry, is so moving from Sky to Virgin Atlantic, moving into aviation, where clearly safety is the ultimate paradigm, if you like. If it's not safe, it's not going to. It's just I was going to say it's not going to fly, but it's not going to work, is it? What has the difference in culture been like going from Sky to Virgin? I don't mean that in any sense that one's better than the other, but of course Sky is not focused bottom line on a disaster potential, and Virgin is. And I just wonder how different it's been moving into aviation.
Moving from Sky into the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so I suppose for me personally, I had been involved in aviation disasters my time before Sky, but that is very different to then being in the organization and having to then plan for it. I was on the other side. So when normally I'll be picking up the phone to clients, and now I am the potential client, right? It's a different kettle of fish. Obviously, different risk landscape. I think the big piece from a cultural perspective is within aviation, because it's so heavily regulated, safety is the number one priority, and therefore the focus is yes on making sure everything is safe, but also emergency response and crisis management is a pillar of that safety management system, really. So within the business, there is a big focus on it. Should something go wrong, do we have the right process? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right resources? Are we set up for success when something happens? Does everyone know what we need to be doing? And so, yes, there is always within crisis management, and everyone who works in this space knows this. There is always that buy-in piece that you need to try and you're always trying to get, because you're competing against time, right? You're trying to get leaders time in their diaries, but once you've got it, like once you've got the time in their diary, you don't need to have a conversation about buy-in, because the culture's there. It's part of our DNA in essence of look, we fly planes and get people from A to B. Sometimes things go horribly wrong, and we've seen that in the news recently, and so therefore we need to make sure that we know what we would be doing if those situations were to happen, so that we can provide the best possible care. And as a business, we are able to continue operations and ultimately get through it.
So David, Harry mentions it's highly regulated. So aviation is regulated in terms of safety, but it's also regulated in terms of how to respond if there is an accident, and depending on where you fly to in the world. But it's very, very interesting that is exactly what Harry's job is based on, is to make sure that the airline can respond according to that, that minimum regulation around the world. There's about 13 or 14 countries in the world, if you operate in and out of them, that you have to have certain things in place to look after affected people. And I just want to start with Harry. Can you tell us what does that look like from start to finish? I know it's a big question to ask, but let's say your day-to-day job, your planning. So you've been given the mandate that there's regulation in place for the airline to be able to respond well. What have you got to have in place as a baseline to be able to do that?
Yeah. Okay. So I suppose this is just one. This is essentially a third of my job is emergency response. I look after the broader crisis management risk profile as well, and also our continuity-based risks, which all weave in and out of this resilience sort of umbrella. On the emergency response piece, that's what you're getting at there, which is that's heavily regulated within those 13 countries. If we were to look at, for example, the US, because that's got the most stringent legislation, if you like, you are making sure that we are. I suppose if I think about it from start to finish of the incident, that you've got trained people. Firstly, you've identified who those individuals are going to be, you train them, you exercise them, and you've got that piece in place. Then you've got to make sure you've got plans. We have to submit our plans to the authorities in the US, and part of that plan is legislated, right? So the legislation in the US, for example, gives you 18 assurances that says you're going to do certain things to support families, and it's all based around family assistance. So part of that is making sure that you have got toll-free number when there's an incident. So families aren't going to be charged to get information or to contact you during an incident. The next piece is around family assistance and making sure that you've got trained personnel that you can deploy onto the ground to provide care and well-being support. Then there's a piece around supporting with personal effects and the catalogue of personal effects and making sure that you can return those to the families. Then the rest of it is mainly all around training. However, I think that was put into place in 1997. There's then been, as Elmary's mentioned, a number of different legislation that's come into place, and that's part of the work that we are doing actually through the UK EPG, the United Kingdom Aviation Emergency Planning Group, is trying to put also some sort of framework or guidance in place for the UK. It's all ladders up to a bigger piece of work. So ICAO stated a few years ago, they put a policy in place that said all member states, so that's part of the UN, all member states must have policy, guidance, or legislation in place for assistance to air accident victims and their families. Some states are slower to adopt that than others. And as an industry, Elmarie and I are both on the board of the UK EPG, and we thought it was really important that we support government and we support the DFT to try and put some guidance in place. And that's part of the work that we've been doing over the last year or so, is to make sure that we are replicating that. That piece of guidance we've written actually takes the best that the US have done, but that was also written in 1997. A lot has changed. Things need to be modernized. We need to innovate a little bit more. And so we've brought it up to 2025. Here is guidance that the UK government is now reviewing, basically.
Yeah, and it's quite an interesting piece because, like Harry said, there's things in place in other parts of the world that we in the UK can actually learn from, and we've got great engagement from the UK government to get something in place. But we also had the opportunity to go. We've done this for many years now. We've worked on this in the basis of the existing legislation in other parts of the world, but it should be updated now, just in basic ways. How do we communicate now? So other legislations say we have to have a toll-free number ready, and people need to be able to call if they're concerned about a loved one involved in an incident. But there's so many different ways that we can now offer as a choice to communicate with us. to find out, who's calling about, are they the next of kin? If they're not the next of kin, do they know the next of kin's details? And we use that information and that data to start reaching out to correct people. But we can do that in different ways now. So we've just looked at that and made our recommendations to the government, and we'll see where that lands. But I've got great hope that that's going to change how we respond to aviation disasters in the UK.
Yeah, I think it's really.
Sorry, Harry, sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to ask both of you, actually. So do you think that where we are today compared to where we were, let's say, even 10, 15 years ago, that there is a better system in place for crisis response? Because, I mean, aviation has been dealing with this issue for, 70, 80 years, I guess, now, in terms of civil aviation. Is it still improving, or has it reached or is the improvement coming by a more universal acceptance that this is how we do it?
I think, in my experience, David, it depends where the accident happens, because if it happens in a part of the world where the ICAO regulations have not only been signed up to, but adopted and implemented, that makes a big difference. But there's other countries who may have adopted or sort of signed up to it. And I've recently been to a response just within this year where I felt like I went back 20 years in my career, because everything that I've now felt like common sense to me and the people I work with was not in place. So that was really interesting for me to know that that piece of education and that continuous improvement really needs to exist. But also another side of that coin is a lot of what we do, happens in certain parts of the world, and we should bring other parts of the world into that conversation and pull them into those standards. But then we are also faced with the challenge where people who are what I call the next generation in our industry, in the roles, they don't have that experience. So hence the reason for this podcast. I really want this to become a library for people who are coming into this industry to refer to these lessons that we've learned, and for us who are sort of further down in the career to teach the lessons that we've learned, because we make the same mistakes and there's no reason why these lessons have to be learned over and over again. So it depends is the answer to your question. In some parts of the world, it is slick, it is excellent, and the families are in the forefront of every part of the response. Government collaborates with the airlines. It is like, everybody moving in the same direction, even though there's chaos at the time. And then there's other parts of the world that I will say are nowhere near where they need to be.
Harry, Harry, what's your view? I mean, you're steeped in, and you've got an education in crisis management as well as all the experience you've had in that time. Do you think there is a better system out there and a greater appreciation of the need for this than there was when you started?
Yes. In short, I mean, Emery's completely right. You've got new people learning old things, essentially. And the big gap in all of that is either legislation, policy, or guidance. If I think about one of the incidents I was involved in, you've got a major incident that's happened, and you've got local police that have no idea what to do, because they're not trained on what happens when something really big happens, right? They deal with local emergencies or potentially major incidents, but locally. As soon as it becomes an international event, or even becomes where there's mass fatalities, they're not trained on that. They don't know what to do when those things happen, and they're looking and they're pulling on the guidance that's already there to provide them a framework on their response. A lack of that framework means that you've got a disjoint in the different agencies that are responding. And if we look at those countries that don't have that guidance in place, often they will not understand the capabilities of the airline, right? Airlines flying into parts of the world where this legislation exists, we have got resource, we have got a process for contacting families and getting a toll-free number to collect information from them. We've got resources to provide assistance and provide care. Some of them might think that that's their job to do. And this is where the alignment piece happens of, yes, it might be your job to do it, but it's also ours. And actually, how can we join forces here? And how do we ensure that that multi-agency response is as coordinated and as aligned as possible? So as people move throughout their careers, the big gap in it is the pass on experience, the lack of framework, the lack of legislation in certain countries, and new people coming into it, essentially learning old problems because incidents happen and they're finding out these lessons for themselves.
Yeah,
If
but
we
you
should
hit
start
good
that,
example.
that'd be great.
You gave a really good example right at the start there about almost the first thing that hit you was the Germanwings disaster, and that was a new thing, a new tragedy, a new incident. Did 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 you learn from the incident, or is it more about appreciating that the process remains the same, if that makes sense? I mean, what do you learn about a new incident that you haven't already built up over this? You said, new people coming in learn old people's issues. Well, maybe that's a good thing. That sounds quite sensible to me.
I think the the big part of it is nuance, the nuance of those incidents. So Germanwings aircraft accident. Okay, there's been many aircraft accidents before, and sadly, I'm sure there'll be more to come. However, each aircraft accident is different. You've got different nationalities involved with the like the location of where that incident is. Um, all of that brings nuance. The family members uh, wanting to go to the incident site is nothing new, but there will be nuance in terms of their needs and what they wish. What are their wishes? Those things will change, and so I think the nuance of incidents it is the thing that is different. People who have been through a similar situation and learned from those things, that's the piece that we need to pass on. Is the lived experiences. That's hard for us to do. Some of that we can bake into frameworks, guidance, policy, so that organizations are not making the same mistakes, right? And that's the key piece is for me, I always think about it, there's an expectation on organizations like Virgin Atlantic that fly. If we were to have an incident, they do not want family groups do not want Virgin Atlantic to be making the same mistakes of what they've seen in previous incidents. They expect us to learn from it. And we do as an organization. And I think there's an industry piece here of how we can encourage governments to adopt the regulation of ICAO to make sure that collectively the industry is not making the same mistakes. We do not want the same things that repeatedly happen. They shouldn't continue to happen, right? In terms of what happens in the response and specifically around family assistance, we shouldn't have to be learning about those same mistakes. Yeah. That is lived experience, which needs to be adopted into legislation. So the new people coming into the industry have got a clear framework to pick up, and all of that is based on lived experience.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that the framework that you are mentioning, for me, I always explain it as you've got to get the foundations right. So if they are strong, then you can deal with the nuances of an accident or incident. Whereas if you are trying to build the foundations in the middle of an accident, it is a horrific position to be in as a crisis responder. So the legislation, the foundations, the planning, the training, that is in place, and then you get your curveballs, which are bound to happen. But you can't build foundations or the track while the train is moving, basically.
And how much benefit, Harry, do you think you have had from taking that route, that educational route, to build qualifications in this whole area, rather than being, I suppose, thrust in through being in the company and finding your way into issues of resilience or crisis management, etc. How valuable has the qualification proved to be?
I mean, invaluable in a sense. We always thought at university that you would get practitioners who would come and pass on that lived experience to students, and you have academics. Now, for me, looking at it from a corporate position, I actually need to balance both, right? there's the academics that do all of the analysis of previous incidents and look at data and mitigations and controls and what works well, what doesn't, and they bring all of the academia side of research to that. And then you've got the practitioner who's been on the ground, who's spoken to families, who's been the one that has led the incidents, and they bring a very different perspective. And so you've got to balance those. And actually now in my job, I look at both of those, right? I look at research, so I look at work that fellow colleagues in the industry are doing, and the research that is out there. But then you're also the key learning for us as and all everyone works in who works in resilience, so specifically emergency response in airlines, all know that actually the biggest learning is when you talk to people, right? We all go to a conference once a year, which is the IATA World Safety and Operations Conference. Between all of the different sessions and the downtime you have with people and the conversations you have, that is crucial, because you're finding there's experience there and there's learnings from incidents that they've had. They may not be major disasters, they might be smaller incidents, but there's all learnings, and we're all sharing information. And this is the beauty of working in emergency response: is it is not competitive. We can share information, and we do share information, because ultimately we all want to be learning from each other to make sure that our own organizations can be as prepared as possible, but as an industry, we're taking steps forward to make sure that we're not making the same mistakes. And that's amazing.
There's about 3 organizations that is really important for anyone listening who's interested in emergency response. There's 3 organizations that I highly rate, and Harry and I are across all of them. The one is AERO, the Aviation Emergency Planning Organization, based in the US. And there's also a conference around that that Mark Dombrov holds at Fox Rothschild, and there's a lot of sharing happening under AERO and under the Fox Rothschild conference. Then there's another space where emergency planners get together and share, which is the IATA Safety Conference that Harry just mentioned. So look into that. And the one that we belong to, both Harry and I are on the board, is the UK Aviation Emergency Planning Group, UKAEBG. So go online and have a look at joining them if you operate in and out of the UK, because it's a very, very valuable communities to belong to get this information from. Because like Harry said, that it's non-competitive, and what people won't necessarily say in public, they say in those closed forums. This has happened to our airline. These are the challenges. This is the lessons that we've learned, and we need to share that in our industry to make sure that we build on those foundations that I've just mentioned.
The UKPG is a really strong group, because yes, it's primarily focused on airlines. We have airports in there as well, but we also look at other organisations as well. So we have the rail networks that are part of that. We have maritime that are part of that, because ultimately, if something were to happen, it doesn't matter if it was an aircraft accident or a rail disaster or a cruise ship incident. The consequences of what we're all having to deal with are exactly the same, and that is where we're all trying to learn from each other. Because it doesn't matter what the incident is, the consequences of what we're dealing with are all the same, and that's where we all share information.
I think for an outsider looking in, those are really encouraging 3 or 4 minutes there about it's non-competitive. It's in fact the opposite. It's collaborative, because that is really good for someone like me to hear. I like that. I want to ask you one question, Harry, which is it's a bit cheeky, I suppose, but if you are facing, and you're head of business resilience, if you are faced with a disaster, beyond the human element of all this, what in terms of process, what would you worry most about in terms of, is the process right? I mean, I imagine you've constantly got to think, have we trained enough people? Are they trained to a high enough level? Have we had enough time with them? Can they do all that? But also you've got to operate in terms of communication on the ground. What would be the thing that kept you most anxious in the moments after a disaster?
So the 3 big things that I always think about: no matter what the incident is, are people, business, and reputation, in that order, right? Now, there's people, those directly affected, and there's also our own people who are responding to the incident. So an incident happens, we've got, let's say it's a cyber incident, right? Or technology outage. We have a team that will initially identify it, go through a process of does it meet a trigger to go to a crisis? And then we have an invocation piece. And we bring together our crisis teams. Now, one of the big things that I focus on is building a highly effective crisis team. And I'm wanting them to gel, right? They all need to know each other inside and out. They need to know their strengths and their flaws. I want a cohesive unit, and a team that doesn't need to rely on plans. The plans should be there to support them and to guide them, and to help them with what the next step is. But they should know these things, and they should also be agile and flex to what the incident needs, right? There might be what's typically known as the black swan events, right? Where we don't have a plan, we did not predict this thing could happen, it's happened. What we are relying on now is a framework, our structures in place, within the business. So we have a gold, silver, bronze crisis structure. We're relying on that working, and so that's why we spend a lot of time making sure that's right, and that people know their roles within that. But ultimately, we're reliant on the people to respond, right? The plan piece of paper does not respond to an incident, an individual does. There's that famous military phrase, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. That's why you need to flex and adjust your thinking. So one of the big things that when an incident happens, that I'm concerned about is our own process working? Have we got the right people? Are they available? Are they in the right places? Have we spun up that response? Is everyone in the same mindset? From there, we can then start planning, and we can start responding, and we respond with one mindset. And that mindset is to provide care and to provide assistance. Everything else is a secondary. So for me, I always think about my crisis team as like I'm the conductor of an orchestra, right? That is the best way I can explain this to people of how a highly functioning crisis team works. Is you have a crisis leader. In my case, we have a silver commander. I am one of them, and I am the conductor of that orchestra. Now, to prepare the orchestra for their concert, right? I need to make sure that they all know how to play their instrument, so they need to be a subject matter expert. They all know where their instrument is. They also need to turn up. They need to be in tune, and they all need to be working from the same piece of music, right? So that's the basics. They then need to rehearse, and that's where the training and exercising comes into place. And then when an incident happens, I need to make sure that they're all in time, that they're all working, they're all playing and all listening to each other, and we're all working towards one thing, and that's to deliver the concert, right? So if you just take that analogy, now spin it into a crisis team. They need to be trained, they need to be exercised, they need to know exactly what they're doing, they need to be listening to each other, and there needs to be one person that is keeping everything together. They're the glue of how that incident works. And if they're working to a strategic intent, right? We're working to clear priorities of how we're going to respond to this incident. Nothing's going to deviate from that. That's your conductor. That's the person standing at the front of the room, keeping everything in check. So that, building that and making that a core unit is really important. From there, you can respond to things, right? So we have other organizations do different things. The emergency services in the UK use an acronym called METHANE. At Virgin, we use SPACE. So we always consider the situation. What do we know? What don't we know? And what is happening? From there, we then set priorities of what we need to work on, and that will always be around people, business, and reputation, business operations. Then we think about our plan. Then we can look at our procedures. What does the piece of paper say we need to do? What do we actually need to do? And and then we can communicate. We communicate upwards within the business to our leadership teams and the boards. We communicate to other organizations that are responding. We communicate to frontline teams and to customers. We always think about that piece, and we always think about the external response. Are we aligned across all of our different channels of communications, whether that's LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, our website, our customer centers, all the different comms channels all need to be aligned. That's the next step. That's the C in space. And then the E is evaluate. What's next? What could happen? As a conductor, if you like, I need to be looking, and you'll see them when they do this, they're flicking over the page to see what's coming next. Yeah. That's the look forward for us, right? As a crisis manager, I need to be scenario planning. Where might this crisis go, and are we prepared for it? And that's thinking on our feet, right? So we use that SPACE acronym. And if we didn't have a plan, if we had a black swan event, we've got a core crisis team that is trained, that is built, that is ready to go. We've got structures internally to help us spin up that response. And we've got some clear framework that can help guide us through the crisis. That is the very foundations to set yourself up for success.
Oh, I feel that's like I've just had an hour in a lecture hall there. You've given me the whole 9 yards, as they say.
Charging for this.
and might I add, David, that Harry is a musician. He plays piano. So I love that analysis.
Yeah. Well,
sorry, say again, Harry.
I was just saying, not as well as you.
Well, we play from the same hymn sheet, at least, don't we?
No, I think that's a very, very strong analogy, actually. And I mean, I often look towards sport for analogies, but actually, I don't think you can top that. That really brings everything together in terms of the orchestra. Although there are always going to be some sounds off, aren't there? Some noises off, because your orchestra, you can't be conductor of every player in that musical maelstrom that's going on around you. I suppose you have to just know that what you're doing is as good as it can possibly be.
Yeah, and I think for me, that's where you exercise, right? So one of the things that we look at is we have an annual exercise, right? And the last one we did in February, that was over multiple days. I think I met you on the second day of that. And before we get to that big exercise, we do smaller ones, and we're building up to it. And we do exercises on different risks and different scenarios. They're not all doom and gloom aircraft accidents. They're going to be different types of incidents that we may face: technology outages, cyber risks, whatever they are. And we're all building up to this big exercise. The important piece when you get to that exercise, that's your final rehearsal, if you like. And one of the big things that we do to prepare for those exercises is we look to see how we can place those teams under significant amounts of pressure. Because, to your point, when it comes to the real thing, no one has probably in their careers, this is the worst day of their business lives, right? Responding to that incident. And with the best practice in the world, it's never gonna be the real thing. So how can I get them to feel 10% of that? How can I get them to feel 15% of that? And when I mean feel it, I need them to feel it emotionally, so that they get it, right? And so that's where we put them under a significant amount of pressure. I then always say to people, when we walk into the room, now you've felt the emotion, check that at the door, bring in the compassion and bring the empathy and the respect that comes with that. And now let's put a plan into place for what we're going to do. And now let's respond. So get putting them under pressure to get them to feel it, and then they need to check that, and then bring the compassion in, but leave the emotional side at the door, because you can't respond if you're in an emotional state.
And I think I just want to ask you something, because I've attended many of Virgin's exercises, and Harry, I have to compliment you. You've got a very invested, cohesive team that arrive with everything. They arrive, with their tools, their instruments are tuned, they arrive with the right attitude. It is very, very rewarding to see how that all comes together when you do your exercises. So firstly, congratulations on that. But I wanted to, for you to just to give us an idea, because you mentioned earlier, you need the buy-in. And I've heard many emergency planners say that they get it, some of the team get it, some of them feel like, it's a bit of a waste of my time, I don't have space in my diary. I feel like that when leadership buys into it, it trickles down. But how, and I know that in Virgin, you've got your top leadership pays heavy attention to this, and they expect everybody else to do this, same as they do with safety. But in your job, how much do you have to sell to the rest of the businesses or business units in Virgin, or in your previous roles in other organizations, to sell what you do as a very, very important part of day-to-day business? Because people always think it's never going to happen to us, or safety is our priority, not managing an accident. How do you get people to buy into this with such passion that you've managed to do at Virgin?
So I think it's firstly correcting them. So when they say, this will never happen, unfortunately it does, right? And if you just turn on the news today, there will be another event happening in the world, and there'll be new news at 10 o'clock tonight, and there'll be different news tomorrow. And whether it's a gas explosion in a residential property in one location, if it's geopolitics and acts of war happening, or whether it's a natural disaster, or whether it's a transport related incident or technology incident or a cyber attack, the news is full of it. So to say that this isn't worth time it is an incorrect statement, because we all know, and we preach this across the industry, it is not if, it is when. And you have to be in that mindset to ensure that you are ready, to ensure that you are preparing and ensure that you're investing in this. I'm lucky at Virgin where, we do have top-down engagement and commitment to this. The next step is fantastic. We've got all of that engagement on making sure that we can respond to an aircraft accident. We now need to look at this risk. And getting time in diaries for people to talk about every risk that may affect the business is a difficult thing to do. We also need to be cognizant of the fact that they've got day jobs, and that's running the business. You're not going to get time to always focus on every single risk that may affect us. So we've got to prioritize, right? You've got to think about the most important risks, and then focus on those. In the background, what we are doing is still continuing to build that core team, making sure that we've got that framework in place. Because if something were to happen today, we've got a plan, because we've been building that, and we've got a core team to rely on, and we've got a framework that will help us get through it. So if we can't focus on all of the risks, we prioritize, and then we build our structure. And that structure, those foundations will help get us through it, and help set us up for success. But for other businesses that struggle to get engagement, education is the thing that sits behind this, right? If you're talking to a team who like stats, you give them stats. How many incidents have affected companies of our size? Boom, here you go. Preach that piece around. This is not the case of if, it is a case of when. You have to be in that mindset, and look internally. There will be smaller incidents, minor events that happened that could have become a bigger thing. And putting people into the mindset of, you sit on the crisis team, we may have never had an incident, you sit on the crisis team, your responsibility, if this were to happen, is this. Are you ready for that? And lots of people, to get the engagement, when you make it personal to them, that's when you'll get it. If you can crack the nut and get the personal engagement and the personal understanding, that's when you get the engagement. So I spent quite a lot of my time thinking and looking around the business and looking around businesses generally, of going, who are the types of people that are part of crisis teams, right? They're you don't go in through your career thinking, oh, I'm going to be part of Virgin Atlantic's crisis team today, or I'm going to be part of Sky's crisis team today. You specialize in technology platforms, or you specialize in finance or marketing. You don't think, oh, I'm going to being part of a crisis team is going to be part of my career. The actual fact is, the more senior you get in the business, you are going to be, it is inevitable that you're going to be part of that business's crisis team. So how can we get them to understand that earlier on, and build some of those core skill sets earlier on? So by the time they get to senior leadership and they're part of crisis teams, they already know half of this stuff. That's the interesting bit to me. Building
the legacy as early as possible and making it continue, which is exactly what Elmarie wants to hear. And that's why you're going in the library, because these are important messages. Harry, I mean, I think it's a fascinating journey you're on, because switching from Sky to Virgin is, it brings so much extra added experience, I think, in terms of, what is an emergency, what is a crisis, what's a disaster. And I think it's very useful for us to pick up on all of that. And we very much value your contributions here as master of the orchestra. Thank you very much.
Very well.
Thank you, Harry. Really good speaking to you. I've always said, when we have our coffee, that you've got the education to back yourself up. You've worked in a response agency. You've worked outside of aviation in a large organization. You've worked in aviation. You're a bit of a jack of all trades, and you bring all that perspective to us. And recently, you've supported me as a volunteer for another airline's response. The passion is there, but you've got the knowledge and the guts to back it up. So I'm so proud of you, and I'm very proud to work with you. So thanks again, and thanks for your recent help. I will one day in our closed groups tell people what that was about, but today I just want to publicly thank you. That was really good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.
See you.
Yeah, that was Harry Conibear-Griffiths. I've got to say, Elmarie, apart from an awful lot of wisdom there, he's still baby-faced, isn't he?
He is.
He doesn't look like he's been around long enough, but I thought it was interesting when he used that phrase. I wrote it down at the time. You've got new people learning old things. Well, he's not a new person by any means anymore. He's been in the business a long time, but clearly he has that sense of bother about whether there's enough sort of almost dynamism within the industry to be moving things forward.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. There is a lot of energy in the industry, but it's driven by a few. And I'd love that to be injected in every part, from legislation all the way down to the next generation coming into this. And Harry is one of those guys that he brings in energy, and he tackles things. He gets involved in the conversations, like at the ICAO level. He gets involved in the UKPG level. He really, really wants to make a difference. But I think he also knows that if he drives the industry forward, it will benefit him in his role as well, because he will have that sort of fiber to back up what he does.
Yeah, and collaborate across sectors as well, which was another obviously strong message. Many people get it, but you still need to see it happen.
Exactly. And I love the collaboration that he was talking about between the police and other responding agencies, because where it goes well is where that is a collaborative approach, and you don't have one lead agency say it's my way or the highway. We are working together for a common goal, and that is to look after affected people.
Well, our thanks to Harry and Elmarie, as ever, good to see you, and to everyone who's joined us, thanks for joining the Go Crisis podcast, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, David. See you soon.
Bye now.
Bye.